In this video, we're going to talk about safety. It's something that I think most HR people aren't very good at, or they aren't involved in a lot, but it's an important part of organizational success. So what should we do about it? These are some of the things we're going to talk about today, and that's coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams and the host of HR Shop Talk. On this show, you get expert insight into all things HR through my conversations with smart, experienced, and successful professionals. I encourage you to subscribe to the show by clicking on the button at the bottom of the screen or subscribe to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Paula Bernat. Paula has 25 years experience as a senior HR leader and operations manager in the public sector. Currently, she's a people and organizational effectiveness manager in the public sector. She speaks at conferences on safety and has won awards for her work with respect to safety transformation. So I'm really glad to have her talking about the subject today. Hi, Paula, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate that. And I do think this is a conversation that I need on my show, but it's been a bit challenging to find someone because HR people aren't often doing it. To start off with our first question here, so what is critical to safety success and what habits should an organization have to maximize safety?
Really, for me, it starts with safety culture. So how do we either enhance or develop a safety culture within the organization? So with that, we're talking about shared values, shared beliefs, shared actions, really that demonstrates that commitment to safety.
Right.
And I think, an important piece that I'd like to highlight is some folks see safety as additional work. And how I like to see it is, how can we integrate it into the day-to-day versus making it this extra job that we have to do? So if we buy a new piece of equipment or we create a new process, how do we integrate it into those activities so it's natural and that safety commitment comes across and then, as I said, further enhances or develops that safety culture?
So next question, what's the role for HR in safety management?
I think first and foremost, the role for HR in safety management is if you think about it conceptually, is protecting an organization's most precious asset, and that's their people. Mm-hmm. However, what you might see in one organization in terms of where safety resides or where the components or parts of safety reside may differ. So in some organizations, we would see disability or abilities management perhaps might rest in a different area from, let's say, the safety advisor role that would be providing, that support on the day-to-day. Right. So again, it can depend on where safety resides in the organization. But I think, human resource professionals play a key role in safety. Mm-hmm. And I think at a minimum, they need to understand the concepts, the techniques to a degree to be able to support the environment. They know the jobs, they should know the job demands. Those kinds of things are critical in terms of really, I think, solidifying that health and safety environment as well as reinforcing the culture.
The role of joint health and safety committees. I actually didn't plan on asking a question about that, and that seems like a gross oversight. Do you want to talk about the importance of that?
From my perspective, joint occupational health and safety committees, they provide a real opportunity, if they're leveraged in the right way by an organization, to enhance an organization's safety system. Generally, these committees are made up of employees throughout the organization that are doing the work in the organization and have insight in terms of, as an example, as to a hazard or as to what PPE might be required. Mm-hmm. Generally, that's prescribed by the work, but again, as time goes on, organizations may change. As I said, they maybe implement a new process, bring in a different piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's always healthy to have, or the joint occupational health and safety committees involved and engaged in these types of changes. Because what let's say the safety advisor or the overall let's say operations manager in question, they may see different things from being so close and doing the actual work, that they may highlight perhaps different gaps or different opportunities.
You said at the start of that, you said leveraged in the right way. If the joint health and safety committee is leveraged in the right way, what happens when they're leveraged in the wrong way? Are there like how would that go badly?
Well, I think, in my experience in my career, what I've seen is when they're not leveraged or not engaged, they become a task that everyone tries to avoid. Certainly on the management side, it becomes something that, whoever gets the short straw has to go to that meeting. And they tend to focus and get a bit distracted in terms of the issues that they focus on. Maybe more housekeeping type issues, or in the case of a unionized environment, maybe more labor management issues than, let's say, really focusing on the core issues that relate to a healthy and safe work environment.
So if you found this helpful, subscribe to see all the episodes and comment. What is your experience with safety? What do you think you need to know more about with respect to safety? Tell us in the comment section below. And back to you, Paula. So safety has a strong moral imperative. Like, we don't want to hurt our employees. But what's the business case? What's the other side of that?
Sure. I think, if I can even go back to the strong moral imperative, how I like to phrase that to people is, I want to see employees go home in the same condition that they came to work in. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a significant business case that there is to tell. I also think that there's stories that we need to bring forward as leaders in an organization to be able to make that compelling case for change. When safety incidents happen, they can change people's lives and impact either how they work, if they work, and how they live their lives. So I know that the business case or the monetary aspect is pretty significant, but I have specific stories that I've experienced from employees, and thank goodness I've not ever had to deliver the message that someone's passed away while on the job. But I've been in a scenario where someone has been off for a significant amount of time, has not been able to pursue their hobbies after their injury, has not been able to do things with their family, has not been able to return to the job that they loved, and had to take a different role in the organization. And so I do feel those compelling stories need to go with the business case, of course, that you spoke of. That really lays out, I think, obviously there's the monetary piece. You're not paying for the absence or the lack of productivity, or potentially someone being on the job, replacing that person that doesn't know what they're doing and maybe make mistakes. And so there are a number of elements when you look at the business case, but I like to think of safety as almost an iceberg. So what are the costs that you can see that are really above the water? Those are pretty crystal clear and apparent, but generally there's a lot of costs that, again, that occur below the water line that I don't think we're as good at articulating because they're not necessarily quantitative.
Yeah, that's a problem with a lot of things in HR, I think.
Yes.
With quantifying.
Yeah, and I mean, as an example, I would assume most organizations don't want to be known as the employer that injures people, and that's that reputational piece would be something that we would see potentially below the waterline, right?
Right.
And again, some of those elements aren't always spoken to or really, I think, considered when people see that business case. And when safety results are really far off the mark in terms of where they should be, that business case is really clear because it can be significant dollars that are at play. When safety results are not far off industry norms, that business case becomes a lot more difficult, I think, to really make the case for change.
So what do you do when you're in that middle ground there?
because let's say the results are not that far off the mark, people don't necessarily see the call to action.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you, I think, pull that in terms of some of those non-quantitative elements into the discussion, as well as the stories to create that kind of case for change. Often in sessions when I was doing kickoffs to talk to leadership about safety in my organizations, I would tell one specific story that was quite impactful for me personally.
So typically HR professionals or generalists, they aren't that comfortable with safety. Why do you think that is?
I think just like in HR, safety has technical complexities. And I think for some HR practitioners, those technical complexities are seen as somewhat intimidating. And I think that, I would say, in the last 10 years, we've seen an evolution where we've seen, again, there's a bit more litigation on the safety side. We've seen folks actually go to jail because of some of the things that they've done or not done. And so I think from that perspective, again, that can be somewhat intimidating to folks in terms of the legislation and the code and the standards, because there is a pretty big breadth similar to HR proper. I think, again, there's a pretty large breadth when we talk about HR. So a lot of skills and a lot of complexity. Okay, so a number of the workplaces I've been in have a real thing, get her done. Let's just do it, get it done as fast as we can and move on. And that's great, but often at odds with safety. So what are some steps you would take in an environment like that to create a safety culture? Generally, what I've seen where it's been most successful is there's been a senior leader engaged and sees the need for change, or there's been a clear signal by a senior leader that that something is not, that the results are not what's expected. And so I think you most certainly need that senior level support in the organization. And then what's that compelling case for change that I talked about earlier? So what are some of those quantitative details in terms of what are the numbers in terms of safety? Like, what is your frequency at? What are your lost time days? How do you compare to other organizations that are similar or in your industry? And what I've also found is leaders inherently are competitive. And so when you tell a senior leader in the organization, that your accident frequency or your days lost, as an example, are twice what, let's say, a competitor or an organization in a similar industry, that generally sparks a response in terms of seeing some kind of need for change. I would also want to suggest that we've talked about this a bit in our discussion around safety culture. And there are actual safety culture assessments that you can do in the organization. And I think those are always helpful to understand if you have a vision of where you want to go. Is it the road to zero accidents? The safety culture will give you a sense in terms of some of those non-quantitative aspects. Again, how does your organization see safety, and how does it view the organization and leaders and supervisors in terms of how they view safety? So safety culture surveys are something that, again, provide you that benchmark so that you can see and have that opportunity to maybe focus and target specific areas. Right. And so if again, around the safety culture, how long do you need to invest heavily in this to see the change and achieve your safety goals? That's a bit of a vague question, but maybe you can provide some insight on that. I think the first thing I always say to people is safety is a journey. And you generally would do your culture assessment, look at your safety system. From those two, identify some gaps. I think it's always important to have an action plan, and that you have a regular kind of cadence of accountability with folks. So what are those goals you're going to set within the organization around safety,
Yeah.
and how are you going to hold people accountable?
Right.
I wouldn't want to say that you can do it in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years.
Yeah.
It really would depend on, I think, the scope and scale of the change that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And also some of those key aspects I spoke of earlier around leadership support.
Okay. And then related to what you just said, what are one or two of the most significant barriers to safety culture, and how do you suggest overcoming them?
Sure. So one of the things that I think often is, I think, unanticipated is the complexity of safety. You have multiple stakeholders involved. You have, of course, bodies of oversight. So in Alberta, you have WCB Alberta. You also have OHS Alberta. And within an organization, you have HR, you have safety, then you have operational areas, maybe you have corporate support areas. And really, when you're digging into that question and looking at the problem of what you're looking to solve around safety, it generally involves multiple stakeholders and establishing what I would say is a shared goal. So what is it that we want to do? How are we going to do that? And really, how are we going to resource that? There's no use in taking something like this on and not really giving it the focus and the support from a resource perspective that it would require. So I think just recognizing the complexities would be for sure number one.
Wow, that was not what I expected.
Okay.
It really wasn't.
No?
Right. And that was the last question.
Yeah, I have a second part to that if you want.
Oh, you do? All right. Well, lay the second part to that on us. Okay, go.
Sure. And I think one of the other barriers that I would highlight would be just that leadership commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Super important to have that at the senior levels of the organization, and for people to live and breathe safety and to demonstrate it every day. So, as an individual, when I walk into a building that I'm working at, and there's an icy spot, do I open the door and just walk by it? Or do I take the time to, scoop up the Sure Grip and spread it over the icy spot? Right. So again, it's leadership commitment. And I would say at all levels of the organization, when it comes to safety, some of our most effective safety leaders are really, in various levels of the organization, and wouldn't necessarily have the formal title of leaders.
Right. Okay.
So when you think about leadership commitment, it's not only the senior leader in the organization that has to support it from from making it an important objective or an important job that we have to get done, mm-hmm. but also how do you also identify those leaders within the organization that are going to help you make the kind of change that you're looking for with respect to safety? So a bit broader.
Thanks, Paula. That was such an important subject, and hopefully a few in my audience get more involved in safety. I did an episode on psychological health and safety, and that link is right beside me. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.